Welcome, everyone. This is Manolo Concepcion, talking to you here from Illinois in United States of America. I'm born and raised in Puerto Rico. This is Volley Junkies, a concept that I created a couple of months ago with the purpose of education through learning from backgrounds and experiences from our guests. Today, we're going into very specific and important subjects in the sport that we all love. And we have someone really special, very capable of talking about all these subjects. Her name is Lori Okimura, and she's going to be educating us about the Paralympic world, about diversity and inclusion, and about how is it to work at the executive level of USA Volleyball and other great organizations that she has belonged to. Welcome, Laurie.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here with Volley Junkies. This project began a couple of months ago, and it's been really exciting to learn and hear from different perspectives around the world, Laurie. And just wanted to ask you, like, how have you spent this past few months of quarantine?
Oh gosh, well, like everyone else, hopefully, I've been home. So I live part-time in California, but it's now full-time. I've been here in California quarantining, not going out very much. Um, Trying to touch base with people in situations like this, through online methods and just checking in with people because I think the toughest part of what's been going on, the past several months is, in my world, there's a lot of athletes that were preparing and gearing up for the Olympics and the Paralympics. Also some professional athletes that I deal with and work with that, have been training and trying to figure out what's happening, with their seasons. But one of the ways that I've been occupying, my time, I'm not a professional athlete, I'm not an elite athlete, is I've been connecting with a lot of colleagues whether it's in virtual panel discussions or seminars, webinars. And one of my favorites is the Global Sport Institute at Arizona State University. It's run by a really good friend of mine, Ken Shropshire, and they've had some incredible online webinars and seminars. And, it's always good for people in the business to kind of refresh, right, and touch base and reconnect. But Global Sport Matters, they've been putting out some terrific weekly webinars, and also now they've shifted to the Huddle podcast, which is great. So I'm a podcast junkie right now. That's how I'm spending my time.
And it's one of the positive things that this pandemic has brought is the concept of education, an opportunity for all of us that have been in this sport 100 miles per hour and don't have or haven't had the time to do so. And as long as we have stayed healthy, we have been able to continue to learn and grow.
That's right. And part of staying, healthy is not just physical, it's mental as well, and there's been some opportunities for people to just sort of slow down, take a minute, reconnect with people you haven't talked to in a while, because we're always so busy, right? Oh, how are you doing today? Oh, I'm just so busy, keeping busy. But are you really productive? I've had the chance to have some great conversations on race and gender with some friends that whose opinion mean a lot to me, but it's always nice to hear in person or live, on the internet, together. But it's kind of an uncertain time too. Nobody's quite sure at what point can we return to what we thought was normal, right? Will that still be normal? And then what kind of adjustments need to be made? And I think we're just now at the point where we're, trying to sort out, what does a return to sport, return to life look like?
What type of role do you think the sport and organizations around the world have in regards of what's going on with discrimination? And specifically, with diversity and inclusion, what are some things that we have been doing well, especially in our sport, and what are some things that you look forward into bettering?
That's a really good and relevant question, because I've been dealing with this for several years now. I think that oftentimes, and right now we're seeing it with the Olympic and Paralympic world, people confuse when you bring up issues like social justice or racial equality or even gender equity, there's always someone who says, but politics shouldn't be in sport, right? But really, those issues are not, at least to me and a lot of my colleagues, those issues are not political issues. You can have different political opinions and still think that social injustice is an important topic, to discuss. They're human rights issues, and I think international sport organizations have been struggling with, separating the two or distinguishing between a political issue that they don't want to, weigh in on so heavily versus social, or a more social or human rights issue, that they certainly could take an opinion on, or at least listen to the opinion of their athletes. I think that's the key right there, the athletes.
From the marketing perspective,
Mm-hmm.
what do you do in order to make sure that athletes, coaches, and everyone that has a strong voice within the sport are able to send a message out there about making a difference?
Yeah. So one of the first things I tell people when I get that question is, first you have to figure out what difference it is that you want to make, right? What is it that there's so many things flying out there, and you may be passionate about multiple things, but oftentimes, deciding what the most important or the most, high priority level issue is that you want to bring forward. If you bring forward that first, it opens a door, right, for more discussion on any other issues that may follow. I oftentimes also tell people, that while I encourage people to speak up and speak out, you need to understand that it comes with a cost, right? It comes with some consequences. To give you an example, about 6 years ago, I met this woman. Her name is Daria Safai, and she's a great human rights champion, but focused at that time, she was focused on the ban on women to enter football and volleyball stadiums in Iran. And, she took a lot, by the time I had met her, she had been involved in this issue for a very long time, and it was right around the time there was another woman who was jailed for over 180 days for trying, only for the crime was to try and purchase a ticket to the FIVB World League match between Italy and Iran that was taking place in Iran. So she never actually got the ticket. She was simply one of a small group of women trying to express their opinion by wanting to purchase a ticket to watch their team play. And for that, she was jailed for over 180 days. And that was her crime, So as an example, I became pretty passionate and a little bit upset, about this, this situation, and started to learn a little more about it. And as I learned more about it, I became more vocal. And one specific example is, that same year in the league, the United States was scheduled to play in Iran. Our men's, so there used to be a World League for men and a World Grand Prix for women, and the FIVB has now put the two tournaments together for the Volleyball Nations League. But back in the day, the tournaments were played in separate, in separate
venues,
to play in Iran. And so you can guess, where this is going. And I am not an essential person by any means. I was a volunteer for the time I spent, with USA Volleyball on their board, which is just over 7 years. And but there were some really essential female staff members, of the men's national team, and one of whom was, extremely essential. She was a doctor who was helping with their mental health, and sports psychologist, right? She actually sat on the bench. Extremely knowledgeable about volleyball as well, but she played a very key role to the team. And under the circumstances, if there was no discussion or compromise, she would not have been able to either enter the stadium, much less sit on the bench, unless some concessions were made. But speaking out about that, I was not allowed at all to be a part of, it just wasn't going to be, extraneous women in the delegation was not really something that the United States Department of State wanted to take on, right? And in the end, the press officer, who was female, ended up being able to attend. She was, given limited, I think, access. Her access was monitored, I believe. But speaking out about it, just simply saying that that's not okay, and making some what people call controversial comments about it, in the press, made me a target. You know, I got death
Mm.
threats. I got very unkind, imagine on social media getting
Wow.
unkind comments. Right? But yeah, I can't repeat a lot of them. I shared one recently, and it still happens from time to time, not as frequently. Now, I haven't been with USA Volleyball for a year now. But I
Mhm.
still, last year, I got a really strange, email, and it set me off. To be honest, it really upset me, and it set me off a little bit. And I shared it on my Instagram, the screen capture, and I called the guy a coward. Well, I assume it was a gentleman, but it could have been anybody, right? But I called him
Mhm.
out a coward. I said, use your real name if you're gonna threaten me, and I go, you can disagree with me. That's fine. I mean, I don't have to like it, but I certainly will give you time to argue with me.
Mhm.
Idea. Um, but use your name, right? If I used my name, you can use your name, right? You can use a
Mhm.
real. So what I tell people is be authentic. And I've been asked this question about Iran specifically, quite a bit, gender equity, and I lecture a lot with students and college students and such. And I had one young woman who said, "Is it worth it?" That was a great question, right? Because I had never, I mean, again, you're so busy running from thing to thing,
Mhm.
trying to keep yourself occupied. I had never really sat down and considered, like, okay, that's a good question. Is it really worth it? Is all of that, um, stress and attack on your person, and physical work or physical, no physical attacks, but verbally, words can hurt, right? As much as anything else. And I,
And I
I
think
said to her,
that, yeah, no, as you're saying, I think that it just the cost of it, it's
yeah,
so heavy and it's so big, and it's most of the time
right,
invincible.
right.
So it's even worse. But what did you say to her?
Well, I said to her, I had to think about it. I told her, I said, I've never really been asked that question before. And I'm a little stumped, but I'll tell you that looking back, the fact that we did make a little bit of progress, things don't happen overnight. The fact that we made progress, but the fact that through voicing my opinion, and on any subject, this is true, by voicing my opinion, I found like-minded people, right, who became somewhat of a support structure, right? And some of them were athletes, some of them were administrators, some of them were fans. They were people from all walks of life. So as many death threats as I got, or hate mail, I got as many people saying, "Gosh, I wish that somebody would have brought this to my attention sooner. Where can I find more information? That's my daughter. I want my daughter to be able to." To exist freely in the world, and the fact that there are places that she can't, is concerning to me. How do I get involved? That's what made it worth it. So yes, in the end, it's always worth it, no matter what. Um, and I
And
have
I
some
think
friends.
that in this subject, my biggest concern, Laurie, is that we are expecting the population that is attacked or
Mhm,
discriminated to be the ones
right,
um, leading the way or speaking about it. But doesn't that show lack of empathy about how we're able to actually be inclusive? Because I think diversity is something that naturally happens, but the
right,
inclusion is where you have to work at it. And for example, expecting African Americans to speak about race, why not everyone else?
yeah,
Why not everyone else take a stand about it? Expecting women to be the only ones defending gender equity. Why not also men? Because I think that that's where true change happens when we understand that the inclusion of those
100%
groups
true.
is basically the concept that we need to be working about it. Like now that we're going through this struggles about race, there are specific places that they're expecting African Americans to be the ones speaking about it, to be the ones educating about it. Everyone has to chip in into what we're trying to work for.
Well, and that is the number one key important takeaway from all of this, whether it's about race or gender or any subject. It's we do, as a society, always naturally expect the oppressed group, right, to take the lead. But really, it's up to, and some people, this is their choice, but some people have decided to stay silent on certain issues because they don't want to Either they don't want to get involved, or they don't want to oppress, to kind of like push their opinion, right,
Hmm.
on others. They say, well, I'm just going to sit back and learn and listen, and all that, and that's fine, except unless you contribute your voice. If you have something to say, you should say it, right? And
Hmm.
no matter what that opinion is, if you can't stand behind it, should it really be the opinion that, the stand that you're taking, right? And I think everybody's voice is important. I've had some really interesting conversation, obviously with everything going on here, in the U.S. with racial injustice. I've had some really interesting and difficult conversations with friends of mine who are Black athletes, right? And talking
Hmm.
about, there's one scenario that I've trying to tell the story of, so to speak. But there I see, all these Black athletes from decades ago who have struggled with their experiences with racism, and then you fast forward to today's Black athletes, who are in their 20s and 30s in the sport that we're talking about in volleyball, and they're having the same issues, right?
Hmm.
So part of the solution, yes, is talking about. Part of the solution was, let's go to the other athletes on the team, right? Whether you're white or Hispanic or Latino or Asian, or it's incumbent on everybody to get involved, right? Because it's not just going to happen with the group that's being oppressed. It's got to happen with the larger group, of people who think, yeah, that's wrong. I want to get involved in that conversation too. Or, here's how we do it right. Let's share that information and educate each other, or at least have the conversation, right? The conversations are not easy. Right. None of these, if you're having the right conversation right now about racial injustice, then the conversation isn't easy, and it shouldn't be.
Hmm.
If you're having an easy conversation and somebody's not saying something that they probably want to, or could, you talk about the cancel culture, you talk about, it's, I
It
had this,
happens.
yeah, it happens, and it's for real. It's not a trend. It's not a fad. And it's not something that people do just for the sake of saying, I'm part of the cancel culture. It's a
Hmm.
feeling that you feel inside when you realize that, people in your circle, or people you've dealt with, or maybe people you don't even know, but you recognize on TV, celebrities or politicians or whatever. It's that feeling you get in your gut, that sick feeling you get in your gut when you realize, okay, this person believes that it's okay that people of, a certain color are excluded, from
Hmm.
this activity or this. Oh, hey, this person supports that guy who's clearly a racist,
Hmm.
So in that case, it's a feeling, but it also then gets, I think, ill defined as, oh, they're just taking you just feel that way because you're from this political party or that political party. It's like, no, actually, I
It's
feel
more
that way
than
because I'm a
that.
human being, right? Yeah,
Yes. And the most
yeah,
dangerous thing is that sometimes we confuse normal with right.
right,
And
right.
and that's that's the most difficult matter that we're going through right now, and that we have gone through for many many years, in terms of that. Just like the case that you're mentioning about Iran, it's
Hmm.
normal
Hmm.
there. So
Yeah,
for them, it's right.
it's
Um,
all that they've known,
mhm,
But
mhm. So
that expression is that, well, we've always done it that way. I hate that expression.
super dangerous. It's a
That's the
dangerous
worst.
expression.
It's an
Yes,
excuse. Okay,
yes.
yes, you've always done it that way. That's true, but is that really the best way or the right way to be doing it?
And
I
then
mean,
one more thing, Lori, is that I think that we might be also going through a dangerous path of only or mainly focusing on equality, because
mhm,
equality for the for the casual eye looks like
right,
we have achieved it in many ways. I
right.
think the most difficult matter is, how do we get to the concept of equity, and
That's
understanding that equity, it's not equal.
right,
And
right.
it's equity might look like this, while equality might looks like this, but this is right and this is wrong.
Yeah, that is the, part of the implementation, right, of diversity and inclusion programs really needs to consider equality. And sometimes the equality part gets lost. And
Mhm.
when I say that, I mean, a lot of times we think about equality like equal pay. So the U.S. women's soccer, national team, they're fighting for equal pay, right? It's a shame that they weren't already getting it, but we
Mhm.
think about it in terms of female to male, type of oppression, right? Or females largely being the oppressed group. But equality works both ways. And one example of that happening in our sport right now and in the United States is the situation out in California with Stanford men's volleyball program. In
True.
that situation, it's actually the male players,
Suffering.
that are suffering right now. And really, I think the most difficult part for them is that they're not quite sure exactly what are the steps that they can take, that would be accepted to maintain equality for their sport. I know
Mhm.
it's an issue of a head count for the most part, with NCAA athletics, and that was a terrific step for inclusion on the women's side, but it has come at somewhat at a cost for some, some non-revenue generating, the Olympic sports, they call them, men's program, men's opportunities. So
And
I
it's
think,
worrisome. It's worrisome
yeah,
because when we see such a successful program that has always established a standard of excellence on and off the court,
right.
be cut that way without the consideration of looking for options to make it work, then it creates a perception of moves like that being done just because of creating checking a box of
That's
how
right.
to actually manage this head count. So a cut like that without an offering of options is just, yeah, very worrisome for not just for Stanford, but also for everyone else that is watching from the outside and saying, if that happened to them, we should be worried about us.
Well, that's it. And what kind of message does that send to the student athletes, from either gender, who commit to a program and then it gets wiped away. There's a young man in Hawaii, where I'm from, Kapono Brown, who's been extremely vocal, in a good way, about, he is an incoming freshman, or he will be an incoming freshman, to Stanford University. And like a lot of other student athletes that attend Stanford, that's a tough school to get into, right? I mean, not just anybody can go to Stanford University, but, for him and for lots of the other student athletes and alumni, from the program, they choose the school for academics. They choose the
Mhm.
program because it's such a well-run, really high integrity program, right? John
Mhm.
Costi, Ken Shibuya, they've been doing, and their entire staff, they've been doing a great job at Stanford to maintain equality for their male student athletes. When you've got Stanford women's volleyball and beach volleyball, to compare the different disciplines that are so outstanding, right? And they've all maintained kind of equal footing, in terms of excellence, right, in their programs. And now you have one of the volleyball disciplines being told, and I'm not on the, I'm not on the board of trustees or, an employee or anything, but from what I understand from the athletes, the athletes are just searching for, for answers, right? The alumni, the current student athletes, people like Kupono coming in, future student athletes, searching for, like, how can this be fair and equitable? That's one example again on how on the men's side there are still, equality issues. On the women's
Well,
side, I think,
and
yeah,
I think that from that perspective, from the men's side, I think it's still wrong.
hmm
4.5 scholarships versus 12. And
right,
this is me talking even as an NCAA women's volleyball coach.
right,
I don't see how that creates any type of fairness into the sport, and also limiting opportunities for a country that dominates in volleyball around the world in both genders.
right. Well, and that this something like what's happening at Stanford is going to severely impact the future of U.S. volleyball. In terms of the number of pros we send, to oversee, and also, establishing more professional tours in the United States. The women will have one coming up next year, but the men are still searching for one, and it also will severely impact the future of the U.S. national team and the Olympic picture. You think about how many Olympians, have come through Stanford, how many coaches of Olympians, have
Mhm.
come from the Stanford program. But I think on a larger scale, getting back to the numbers, right? 4.5 scholarships. I was having a conversation, years ago, about 20, almost 30 years ago. I was part of a group. in the sport, what was called back then the Sporting Goods Manufacturers Association, right? It's sports and fitness industry of America now, but it was a group of manufacturers of volleyball products that were concerned about men's volleyball, right, disappearing from from the face of the earth, right? So every company put in. I mean, we decided, okay, let's everybody, no matter who you're sponsoring, no matter what your agenda is, everybody put a bunch of money into this fund, and that will help to create some financial opportunity. And I mean, we're talking, it was, each school that wanted to start a program or that had a, fledgling program they were starting, they only got like $1,500. I mean, it was all all that could be mustered at that time, but it was
something
nominal. Yeah, it was something, right? And to some of them that was uniforms, or it was one road trip, or something like that. Now Molten is a company that has really stepped up over the years, and for, I mean, I want to say it's at least 20 years, they have been committed financially, even to the extent that they helped start the Division III championship, which is now NCAA, championship. They've been a really strong partner and sponsor, and they've literally put their money, into the fold. And that's tough for a ball company to do. I worked for a ball company, and I mean, the number of balls you'd have to sell to actually make that kind of investment, be equal, as we're talking about equality. I mean, it's not, they're investing money in the programs. Well, back then we used to, I mean, when I say this, we used to laugh in a sad way that there were only 4.5 scholarships, right? And this was like in the 90s, we were talking about this, right? Laughing about this. And I promise you, just this past year, I was having a conversation with some volleyball friends, we were doing an online chat, and the topic of the dwindling opportunities at the collegiate level for men's volleyball, that was our subject, right, that we were talking about. And it kind of trickled down into, how can high school and club be increasing and the number of colleges that they can go to is decreasing, right? And so somebody on the call asked, about the finances, and said, well, so how many scholarships are they up to now? And the other two of us on the call who knew were like, 4.5. And he's like, wait, I played in the 90s. It was 4.5 when I played in the 90s. I'm like, yeah, and it's still 4.5. Yeah, and it's exactly the same. It's still 4.5.
Laurie, and the disadvantage that it also creates, that is an invisible one, it's that now not just it limits the sport financially, but it also limits who chooses volleyball. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah, now if I come from a disadvantaged population, I'm gonna have even less of a chance, or less of a hope, to actually go into the route of volleyball. It compared to women's volleyball, which that's a different subject of how much club volleyball costs and all that, but it limits the men's side in that matter as well. So now there's only a certain population that will be able to afford becoming a volleyball player.
That's exactly that. That is part of the bigger problem. That's the issue. The issue is access. Access comes with financial, ability to pay. There's the threat now with this pandemic situation that across the board there will be fewer opportunities for kids to play sport at all. Whether it's access to physical places to play or access to funds, to be able to participate. So you're right. That the bigger problem now is access, really. The be able to afford.
And in terms of now, let's jump into para volley, something that you're really passionate about. Tell me a little bit about that. I think you're the first guest, and I feel bad for this. First guest in months that I have brought that can actually speak about this subject. What do we need to know? Give us a crash course of why do people need to pay more attention to para volley.
Well, I can recommend some great guests that know way more about this than I do. So I became really interested in para volley years and years and years ago when I was able to see it for the first time. So in the United States, I had the opportunity to see what was then the sitting and standing para volley program. And that was thanks to two gentlemen, one who recently passed. His name was Mike Hewlett. Was sort of, I describe him as like the godfather of U.S. Para volley, and John Kessel, who just recently retired from USA Volleyball. terrific champion of all things volleyball all around the world. But in
Amazing.
particular, he's really been able to help make some strides in sitting volleyball. To
Hmm.
me, it was love at first sight, right? I love all sorts of volleyball, but to me, it was I'd never seen sitting volleyball before, And when I came closer to the court, I didn't realize that the team that was playing standing volleyball, that they had prosthetics, they had, and then so now the Paralympic program only has sitting volleyball in the discipline. We're hoping, crossing our fingers, to add um, beach para volley to the program in time for Los Angeles in 2028. And I'm doing everything I can to try and get more exposure for that. But what I really, really enjoy about World Para Volley in particular, I only came into it in the last few years, and it was entirely because of a really dear old friend of mine who became the president of World Para Volley. His name is Barry Kusner from Australia, and the Australians are doing great things with, and they have been for quite some time, with para volley at all levels, But Barry, who became the president of World Para Volley, he had read an article where I was quoted because USA Volleyball, who's also championed, the sitting volleyball discipline for quite some time, had
Hmm.
taken the steps to become the official national governing body of sitting volleyball as well. So now they include, talk about inclusivity, right? Sitting volleyball, they govern snow volleyball, beach volleyball, beach para. I mean,
Love it.
everything volleyball, they govern. But the at the time, there was a terrific champion for Paralympian. His name was Brent Rasmussen, and he was elected to represent the para athletes. And Barry had read this article about Brent, who's quite famous in the para volley global universe, and saw that I was quoted as welcoming Brent to our board. Was also volunteering to serve on the board at the time. And Barry
Mm.
called me up right away, as happens in our world of volleyball, right? When you see a friend who's got the same interest as you, Barry sent me an email. I was like, hey, would you like to get more involved? And 100%, absolutely. One, because I've always been, fascinated with the world of sitting volleyball, adaptive sport, adaptive volleyball, but sitting volleyball in particular. And two, because as you know, in the volleyball world, like your friends, your family. Right. And so
Mhm.
when Barry, I'd worked with Barry as far back as the late 90s when he was working on the Sydney Olympics and Paralympics. And so somebody I really respect and trust, sure, I'll work with you. Why not? Why wouldn't I? Um, but I'll tell you, so sitting volleyball, is one area where I've been learning. I learn something new every time, right? And now
Mhm.
that beach para volley is starting to pick up, it's kind of the same. Is that we're trying to pioneer a new discipline in the Paralympic Games. That's pretty unique, right? That's a pretty special thing
Mhm.
to do. When the U.S. women won the Paralympic gold, you see you got a clip there when they won the gold medal in Rio. I mean, that was like I still get goosebumps, and thinking about like what an accomplishment that was, and it came with decades of coming in, second and third, which were still amazing accomplishments, but decades of really hard work behind the scenes by the athletes, by the coaches, by advocates, by people like Mike Hewlett and John Kessel. And there's a part of me that to keep that going. And so that's why I got involved. What can I do on my little corner of the planet, right, to help advance the cause? Um, Sitting volleyball, it's played all around the world, just like volleyball, but the opportunities for major competitions, right, whether it's a world championship or a World Cup or even just zonal or regional competitions, the opportunities are not there as they are for volley or beach volley or snow volleyball even. So that's one of the areas of
Is
emphasis.
there a big demand? Like, is there a lot of people that are interested on actually playing the game and they just don't have access, Laurie?
I think it's a couple of things. There is a demand once the opportunity is exposed. So, I was on a clinic the other day, and I heard some Paralympians talk about when they first got involved in adaptive sport, they were hesitant because they don't want to be perceived as being disabled or crippled or unable, to do something.
Hmm.
And these are the words that that they were using. Um, But I don't see it that way. I think that there is every time I've been, and although sometimes, volleyball, you play to an empty arena, but every time I've been around sitting volleyball, when people discover that it exists, because they may be seeing it for the first time, right? So when somebody walks into a gym, and I was up in Halifax, Nova Scotia earlier this year before the pandemic, to be a part of the last Paralympic women's qualifier. And it was being held in this beautiful multi-sport facility. It was a facility that was actually built for the Canadian Games, and there were lots of people, going through the facility, looking at the the arena that had been built and the beautiful courts that Volleyball Canada had put together, and they were like, "What is this?" But then they would stop and they would watch and be, I guess surprised, was the reaction, at how fast it is, and
It's a lot
oh
of
my
fun.
gosh,
It's a lot of
yeah, it's a
fun.
lot of
Big
fun.
rallies, a lot of excitement. There's a lot of great plays
No,
going
the
on.
activity, right, lot. I mean, it's a lot of action, right? And some of them didn't even notice until, a few minutes watching, or a set or two that they watched, that these athletes were adaptive athletes. They didn't
Mhm,
realize, until they
mhm.
saw, somebody put on their prosthetic, or, in sitting volleyball, you remove most of your prosthetic devices. So, they didn't even, consider the fact that these were adaptive athletes. The other thing I think is interesting is that sitting volleyball, and beach para volley, but sitting volleyball in particular also is very inclusive, right?
Mhm.
There are competitions around the world where you don't have to be an adaptive athlete. You can participate. Like I can play on a sitting volleyball team with other, Paralympians. I mean, of course, it's not the Paralympics, but in friendly competitions, and
Ori, is that the answer? Is that the way that we can grow this game? Is like by understanding that this is not just for one population, that we can all play this game?
I think so. I believe that, and that's one of the reasons why after my term was over with our national governing body, I sought out other ways to still give back, mostly on the international level, like with World Para Volley, the FIVB. FIVB has a strong interest in adaptive sport as well, and they've had not only conversations with World Para Volley, but now there's an actual working memorandum of understanding between the two organizations. Because the
Mhm.
way that we can advance volleyball, period, across the world is by bringing it together. If there's a VNL competition somewhere, and there happens to be the opportunity to put sitting volleyball into the program, then maybe that's a way to give some exposure, right? Maybe that's a way to give another opportunity to compete. But I
How do
think
we
it
make
is.
it? How do we make it going to college, Laurie? Can we do
I
that?
know. I really would. I one step at a time, one step at a time. But I really think that in a way, so there's an organization that I was so fortunate to be brought into, Angel City Sports. And
Mhm.
I'm currently I'm volunteering on their board, but I first got involved with them as just a volunteer. And for sitting volleyball, that's what brought me into the organization. So Angel City Sports, which is based in Los Angeles, actually kind of started or got a bit of its foundation in clinics by becoming a part of UCLA's adaptive sports program. Not a part of in terms of administration, but UCLA and most campuses, have, like Arizona State has an adaptive sport program as well. While not considered varsity, NCAA programs, these are more recreational level programs that serve the community of students, right? The whole student population, but also people within the geographic community of the campuses who might also want to participate, and through Angel City Sports, I've been exposed now to more sports than just volleyball, but also they have adopted sitting volleyball officially into their curriculum, and they serve hundreds, thousands of adaptive athletes from age 5 and younger all the way to adult participants. So for me, I think that's a first step, learning
It's
more
amazing.
about the adaptive recreational programs that exist on college campuses. That's a fantastic way, to try to bring adaptive athletes and non-adaptive athletes together, right? Because you really need the venue.
Talk to me about superstar Nieves, please. Like,
Oh
what?
my gosh,
Why do we
I
need to go
can't say
watch
enough
her?
about her. You know what, she so Nikki, I find to be such an amazing person. Now, I would find that even if she didn't have anything to do with sitting volleyball, but she's also a terrific like icon in sitting volleyball. What I love about her is she like generates her own fire, right? She generates her own, and then everybody around her, you know, draws from that same energy. And she's very not only is she very active, you know, in terms of being an athlete and participating, you know, for her country and representing the USA, but she's extremely active in governance and volunteering and advocating for athletes' rights behind the scenes. You know, both with Paravolley Pan America, which is our zone, you know, that covers North America down to South America and Central
Mm-hmm.
America. But she's also involved in World Paravolley's athlete advocacy, you know, efforts and leadership. You know, and she's trying to, I think, bring the voice of the athletes, make it louder, you know, bring it more into the forefront. But she's extremely intelligent in the way she's doing it. You know, she's talking to people from all countries, trying to figure out what are the challenges in everybody's country. Some challenges obviously are different, you know, in Europe than Asia, in Asia than in North America, you know. But boy, she's exciting to watch. She's as exciting to have a conversation with. I would extremely highly recommend her for one of your guests.
I must say that I have reached out, but I haven't heard back. So the
Oh,
efforts have been there for
I'll
sure.
whisper in her ear. I'll whisper in her ear. She's
Awesome,
terrific. I
awesome.
can't say enough about her.
What are the basic different rules that we should know between indoor and parabolic? Like what should we know?
Well, a couple of
Like
things, and
differences
again,
in rules.
I'm yeah, and again, I'm still a student, you know, of the game, but a couple of things that most of the athletes share with me, you know, and the differences. The court size, you know, is different. It's obviously you can see from the video, it's a much smaller, you know, court size. The ball is the same, the equipment is the
Mhm,
same. It's set at a different, you know, height, but most of
mhm,
there's actually more similarities than there are differences. You know, obviously the main physical difference is the sitting volleyball athletes are required to keep their buttocks, you know, on the floor in certain, you know, certain skills. You know, otherwise it's a fault. You know, and we don't see that in the in standing volleyball in you know, indoor women's and men's volleyball. Obviously, that's not that same challenge because they're standing, right? In beach
mhm,
volleyball, that's not that same challenge, you know. But there's sitting beach volleyball. There is standing, you know, beach para now, which is, like I mentioned before, on its way to the Paralympic, hopefully on its way to the Paralympic Games.
mhm.
But really, there aren't as many differences as people would think. The rules, you know, with the exception of things that are specific to, you know, to playing on the lower surface and having certain parts of your body, you know, not elevating when you make your skill. The rules are very similar. You know, 3 touches and all. What I think is interesting for people. So I'll tell this story. A couple of years, or maybe it was about 4 or 5 years ago, there was an opportunity where the women's sitting volleyball team was training. It was I think it was at a U.S. Open championship, and the men's indoor national team, they were also playing an event there, and they were training in the same space in the convention center. And this was in, I believe, the two groups were passing, you know, the women's sitting team was playing and the men were just passing by, you know, on their way out of the practice. And they kind of took a look and was like, oh, you know, so the two coaches, you know, Don Farah, always trying to expose his athletes, you know, to everything he can. And Bill Hamiter from the women's team, you know, was like, oh, hey, sure, you know, you guys can join our practice. So for a few minutes, they were able to, you know, to play together in scrimmage.
That's a
And
good
I think,
idea.
well, it
A
was a
very
terrific
inclusive
idea.
idea.
It was
Yeah.
terrific idea. You know, talk about inclusion. Like that's how, you know, that's a tiny, it looks like a tiny thing, you know, maybe it was a tiny thing to them. Oh, hey, we're just going to play for a few minutes, but it was huge, you know, in terms of bringing the athletes more to, you know, together, even to know each other, even to
Mm,
meet. You know, everyone
mm,
thinks, oh, everybody on the national teams, all the national teams, they know each other. That's not true because they
mhm,
rarely have an opportunity to interact, you know,
mm.
unless they train in the same place. They never compete in the same place. So when you do have the opportunity to interact like that, and the takeaway for me, the greatest moment was, you know, one of the world's, if not the world's best libero, Eric Shoji. So
Yes.
he was part of that training team, that team that was competing, right, for the men. And he gets down there and he's like, I'm a middle blocker, I'm a middle blocker. And so that, I mean, that was the perfect way to describe the excitement, right? When you play sitting volleyball or even watch it for the first time, is that, yeah, you know what, you can be any position, even though, yes, there are positions, outside hitter and middle blocker and setter. If you notice, if you watch carefully, these athletes have to be good at everything. It's very similar to
Mhm.
like beach volleyball. They have to be able to know how to do everything at any given point in time. Not that that's not true of indoor volleyball, but it's more true in a practical sense for like beach volleyball or sitting volleyball. You may have to be the setter for one rotation. You may have to, be a middle blocker if you get caught in the wrong place or the right place, the right opportunity. So
It's
there's
the
a lot
ultimate
of
way to avoid early specialization then. There's no specialization in parabolic.
a great way to look at it. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. And you do have to be good at everything. It doesn't mean you're going to be good at everything, but you do have to
Mhm.
know, how to play everything. The other difference maybe is not so much a rules difference. And again, I don't want to, think of it in terms of differences, but one
Mhm.
thing I think that is you can compare, differentially, is that the lifespan, the career lifespan of a sitting volleyball player is, to me, what I've noticed, a lot longer than in other disciplines of volleyball. And the entry point at which a person enters into sitting volleyball, at least in today's world of sitting volleyball, has been sometimes at a older age. There are a lot of veterans, for example, participating in sitting volleyball who didn't discover the sport until after they experienced an injury or they were in some sort of physical rehabilitation, and the option was offered to them for adaptive sport. And this happened to be one of several adaptive sports: wheelchair basketball, wheelchair softball, adaptive archery, adaptive golf. There's every sport can be adapted. Period. For
I
anybody
love
at any level. Right.
and the concept in parabolic, about from an adapted sport standpoint, I love the concept that also the person is free from any wheelchair, from anything else,
Right.
and it's just
Right.
them out
It's just
there
them. Yeah.
um, having fun with it. So, I definitely invite everyone to get a bigger interest in this sport, and hopefully
Yeah.
we can use Volley Junkies to create an opportunity for this sport to be showcased even more.
I hope
Um,
so. That would be great.
I want to jump really quick into another type of volleyball that you're passionate about, snow volleyball. Tell me about that.
It's people think it's a joke, but snow volleyball is real. I promise you, snow volleyball is real, and it's not that it just started. Right? People have been playing volleyball in the snow, if they are in the snow, all over the world, right, for years, right? And mostly it was thought of as like a pastime, a recreational pastime or something you just did because it was snowing outside. You want to play volleyball, put on all your gear and play. But the FIVB has been really passionate about supporting snow volleyball in a more traditional, like official competitive sense, right? So actual, there was an exhibition at the
I
winter,
saw that.
yeah, the Winter Olympics a
Sorry,
couple
but
years ago.
why do we need snow volleyball? I come from an island. You come from
I
an
know,
island.
I come from an island.
Why is it that we want to play under the cold?
Well, maybe a strange answer to you would be it's another part of inclusivity, right? There are
True.
people who don't come from beautiful islands like you and me, right? Puerto Rico, Hawaii, like come on, right? Gorgeous places to be, but there are people who don't live in those environments,
Mhm.
and I think one of the things I've always told people, and like this is how I explain it, and when people start looking at me like snow volleyball, you got to be kidding, what? That's not real volleyball. I'm like, absolutely. Because one of the things that I've always, my entire life, I've been involved in volleyball, right? And one of the things I always share with people when they ask me, like, what is it that you just love so much, about this sport? One of the key things is that you can play it anywhere, at any time, with anybody,
Yes.
right? And that's true of, I've seen volleyball being played in mud flats, in rice paddies, on the beach, off the beach, in tennis stadiums. I used to work for the AVP, and bless their hearts. I mean, they built this fantastic. I mean, this was back in like the late '80s, early '90s. They built this fantastic beach volleyball, like prime beach volleyball stadium in the middle of Fort Worth, Texas. right? So
Mhm.
you can play volleyball anywhere. Why shouldn't that be true of snow volleyball, right? Snow
Mhm.
volleyball also, and as you know, being a volleyball person, right? The different disciplines of volleyball, the different factions, if you will, the different groups you belong to or anything, that it draws different people, right? I mean, there's always somebody who gets attracted to wanting to be a part of, volleyball conversation because, oh, I played once, or I tried to play, or I played in high school, or I played in college. There's always some connection that somebody has, right? And either they played as a child, or had friends who played, or everybody has somehow had some connection, right, to volleyball. Um, and with snow volleyball, it's one, again, people have been playing it who live in the snow a lot longer than we've been talking about it, but it's something new, right? It's something different. It's something that you don't expect. It's look
Are there
common conversation. It's incited since it began, right?
are there are there any different rules, or is it the same?
It's well, there are different rules in terms of the number of players. So it's three on three. You
Okay.
actually have four players on your team, but it's a 3-on-3 situation. But other than that, aside from the equipment that you have to use, Mikasa has made a special official volleyball for snow.
An
Obviously
official snow
conditions.
volleyball? I
Yeah,
have never
official
seen
snow
it.
volleyball. Yes, they have an official snow volleyball. It's just a little bit different material to consider. The beach volleyballs are made differently from indoor volleyballs because they have different surfaces
Right.
that
Right,
that they
right.
have to endure. I talk about balls like they're people because I used to work for Mikasa, but there's a special snow volleyball. Other than that, it's the court. Everything looks the same except you're playing on a different surface.
Mhm.
It's more like beach volleyball, I think, in terms of rules and regulations because the environment, environmental factors are similar, but um, it's exposing our sport in whatever shape or form to a whole new area of opportunity, new places to play, and some of these places, while when we're playing snow volleyball, it looks like, oh my God, it's freezing and there's all the snow on the ground. But in the summer or the spring, when temperatures are warmer, that could potentially be a spot for beach volleyball. It could potentially be
Mhm.
someplace they play also indoor volleyball. Some little kid who wants to play in the snow may pick up volleyball in general because they went to a clinic, that was being hosted by FIVB and snow volleyball. So
It's
um,
basically
it's for
creating
real.
barrier, like creating an opportunity to have no barriers and no excuses to fall
That's
in
right.
love with the sport that we like.
That's right. Right. It's more opportunity. My sort of mantra lately has been you have to create an opportunity for yourself to be able to create opportunities for others around you. Right.
I love
And in
that.
this case, the FIVB has created this opportunity with their partners in snow volleyball to potentially open up another avenue for participation, not only at the grassroots level, but it is a serious proposal underway to include snow volleyball in the Winter Olympic Games. And if that was to happen, then the FIVB as an international federation would be, I believe, the only international federation that has disciplines in both
I
the
love that.
winter and summer games.
It's a big move.
So
It's a
yeah,
big move.
it's
It's
exciting,
ambitious. I like it.
right? It's exciting and it's fun.
Yes. I want to talk about your other passion, beach volleyball.
Right,
I am concerned, at least from the stands, about the growth
right.
and support to this amazing sport within the game that we love. Um, is my perception correct about the lack of also opportunities
Hmm.
for growth and exposure that beach volleyball is having right now? I see that many opportunities and many projects that were destined to help
Hmm.
this sport continue to evolve has basically just died.
Yeah. So when we talk about, and you're right, you are right. There have been lots of threats, to the growth of beach volleyball. When we talk about um, the decline or the negative factors, what we're talking about really are economic factors. Beach volleyball as a pastime and as a competitive elite, Olympic sport, it's growing actually faster than ever. And one of the I think contributing factors to that is that all around the world, um, the competitions are being held, and whether they're friendly competitions or official competitions, starting at age groups much younger than before, right? So now you're seeing a lot more what we would call juniors, right, in the U.S., or youth, right, under 21, under 17, under 10, So there are way more opportunities, for development in terms of playing and athletes and support in that respect. Even in the United States, I would say, and a lot of people would say, that the inclusion of women's beach volleyball as the 90th championship sport, with the NCAA, that was a huge timeline moment for beach volleyball, because that did a lot in terms of opening up more opportunities, 10 more full scholarships for the female athletes, but it also opened up opportunities for athletes from other countries to come to the United States and kind of learn from what they would be, considered to be some of the top coaches in the world, right? Some of them are former players, some of them are former coaches, but also it's an opportunity, again, an opportunity, right, for a higher level of instruction, a higher level of engagement or competition. And from that NCAA move, in only a short amount of time, within the last 6-7 years, you've seen the emergence of a new generation of beach volleyball athletes at the elite level. And so the growth and the, sort of the future at the on the physical side, with the athletes is bigger and better than ever. The problem is more economic, and there are lots of reasons for it. I mean, everyone you ask, is going to have maybe a different reason for it. But what I have seen, is sort of this evolution, or maybe it's more de-evolved than evolved, but the reason or the motivation for promoters to get involved has changed dramatically, over the years, right? And at one point, it could have been a national federation, wanting to host the event so that their athletes could compete and earn their spot in the games. At some point, I used to be one of the technical supervisors for the FIVB World Tour in the early 2000s, to mid 2000s, and back then, the fast-paced growth, it was like 17 countries, and I mean, just, dozens and dozens of tournaments. But one of the common factors is a lot of government-run tourism agencies that wanted to promote, their city or their beautiful beaches, or even indoor, more inland venues. They wanted to promote people coming to visit. So there was, I think, the year that some of my colleagues and I were kind of like doing a head count. There were 17 events for each gender. Some of them were dual gender events, but there were 17 events on the calendar, and I think 15 of them were sponsored by like local tourism or national tourism agencies like Visit Switzerland or Visit Stad and Phuket Tourism, and so it was a really good time for the tour, because those government agencies had a lot of resources, they had a lot of political value in the countries. You could get things done like building courts, and and there was also a give
Lori,
back.
I would have thought that the main sponsorship would have come from alcohol and cigarette type of companies, like it was in the 80s and 90s.
Well, surprisingly, no. Now, in the 80s and 90s, you refer to the alcohol sponsorships, which were extremely valuable. It was like the AV, you're talking about the AVP and the WPVA, right? AVP
Right.
was Miller Brewing Company, WPVA was Coors Brewing Company.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had this conversation with someone on another online chat about what people have to remember. And I worked at the AVP in those years. I started in the late 80s and went through until the mid 90s. The involvement of the alcohol companies started as really, it was almost like a media buy. It was like an advertising program, and that's okay because it was a big advertising buy. It was a big media buy, several $1 million. And if not for investments from companies like Miller Brewing and Coors, there would not have been a tour back then. But it was like the perfect marriage of, they needed something to showcase their brand, and beach volleyball was, again, at another high. There've been lots of highs and lows, but it was at an all-time high. It was attracting the attention of live television, first with ABC and then with the likes of NBC, and it was on cable television with all the networks, or with the Prime Ticket and ESPN, and there was an appetite, right, for beach volleyball, and it was presented in a really kind of high level way by these alcohol, investment companies, these companies that were investing their dollars. Jose Cuervo, another, spirits company.
Big one. Yes.
Boy, the Triple Crown, Jose Cuervo, which a lot of people don't remember. Maybe we remember it, but some people don't remember that. Like, somebody came to me once, like, "Oh, wouldn't it be a great idea to have a Triple Crown of beach volleyball and offer all this money in these exotic places?" I'm like, yeah, that already happened. But yes, it is a good idea, and we should do it again. But the investment, it was a lot, and a lot of the people who came down to the beach, they heard about it. If you ask them, like, "Oh, I heard about it on the radio," and, those are different times, right? No, so now they would say, "Oh, social media," or but they heard there was a lot of advertising dollars being invested, right? So what's the use of putting on a terrific event if you're not telling anybody about it, right? And so you've got 50,000 people and all that, but again, the evolution or the development, of the sport has changed a lot. There's some people that say, "Oh, that's making an Olympic sport destroyed it." Well, you can still play. You can still have a great open tournament anywhere in the United States, and there are still amazing tournaments being held that have nothing to do with the Olympics, right? They have nothing to do with qualifying. I mean, this is the beauty of our sport. Right, you can play it anywhere, anytime. You don't need a reason, right? You don't need a reason to host terrific events. Just because it's not a pathway to qualifying to the Olympic Games, there's still going to be people that are fill your draw. But I think what has hurt us, and again, this is my personal observation, is somewhere along the line, the motivation for hosting events changed. And the people hosting the events changed, right? And you always hear about it's one thing to talk and have a real flashy sponsorship proposal. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. But if you can't really do that, and if you don't really deliver that, and we're all guilty of this, right? Every single person who's ever done an event is guilty of this, right? But if you really take it to the extreme and don't deliver, or never intended to deliver, it hurts everybody. In the sport, it makes people reluctant to want to invest, who are outside of our volleyball world. And to be quite frank, there aren't enough people inside our volleyball world. We think it's large, but it's in comparison to international sport, it's a tiny fraction, right, of all the other international sports that a company could get involved in.
And I heard from promoters that promoters are indicating that they got unmotivated to continue creating events because of how difficult getting insurance for the event was, or getting allowed to do that by governments it was. So now those permissions, those permits, and to gain access to the beach and create such a tournament have become really difficult. At least I can speak for my island. That has been one of the biggest hurdles to create more events. And then also, I have also heard that it is happening in the U.S. Is this accurate?
It's happening all over the world, but primarily in the United States. Because if you think about it, if you go back to the old AVP days, they started on the East Coast, on Florida, in the Southeast, and then they moved all back to California when the weather was nice, jumped back to the Northeast, went to Chicago. I mean, there was a pattern, not only based on where the beer companies needed to advertise and what their key markets were, but there was also a pattern based on the weather. Well, the weather's changed completely, and it's difficult to as much as we want to have these huge scale beach volleyball events on natural beaches, it's difficult to get the natural beaches because it's more than 3 days, or more, 2 days. It's the 2 weeks before to build the site, the 2 weeks after to take it down. And now you're taking, away the beach from regular beachgoers or people that just want to play, recreationally and for almost a month. Right. But it is true. So one of the things, and I don't think I was very popular in when I expressed this, this sentiment, but I actually don't mind as much as I love the natural beach setting, I actually am one of the people that doesn't mind the artificial or the inland, setting. We've had a lot of
Yes.
Olympic Games in inland, artificially built venues, semi-permanent venues. We've had a lot of FIVB World Tour events in fantastic locations, like in Stade, Switzerland. Where are you going to find a beach in the Alps of Switzerland? But boy, I tell you what, that's a terrific, event and a
Amazing.
great landscape, and other factors that come into it. Your infrastructure. It's difficult it's always been difficult to build the back of house, on the natural beach. It's
Mm.
incredibly expensive. I think one of the companies that had been doing it, very, very well was Beach Majors, that ran the major series for the FIVB, for the last several years. And they built in Fort Lauderdale, on a natural beach. They built what looked like, I mean, if you were inside one of the, the tents or in the VIP tent, you may not, you can close your eyes and you may not realize you're on a natural beach, because they built, facilities, restrooms, everything, and it costs a lot of money to do that. And on the other hand, when I was working as a supervisor for the FIVB, I was involved. I mean, I loved every group that I worked with, but I was involved in some really difficult situations for promoters building on natural beaches, whether it was weather, Adelaide. Days they had to completely rebuild their beach in order to make it compliant. They brought out a sand specialist from Canada. They had backloaders, they had everything. Same thing in Bermuda. I was responsible for overseeing the under-19 World Championships in Bermuda back in 2006 when Hurricane Florence came through, right? And although it was only a Category 1 hurricane, there's pictures of the referees. I mean, God bless the referees, digging with shovels and trying to keep the water from coming onto court 5 and court 3 and court 2. So there, and same thing, the government in Bermuda had to basically rebuild their beach. And we're talking about environmental issues, and not just obviously the financial issues, but environmental issues, all personnel issues. For you and I both come from island nations, right, or island areas, and it's like this is a tough thing to be able to pull off without your government support.
So
So it is, yeah,
ironically, the growth of the game of beach volleyball is probably destined to experiment or at least consider more inland opportunities, because of what constructing and building
right,
opportunities around an actual beach,
right.
the difficulties that it presents.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a problem that's been addressed, for decades. I mean, there is, and I have to be honest, I'm not sure where else around the world this is true, but in Japan, just outside of Osaka, Japan, there's actually a beach volleyball stadium, like a permanent stadium that was built. I mean, this was like, I think it was built in the 70s. I think it might have been built even before that, but it's in a recreational park area, natural beach, right? It's actually
Mhm.
on the beach. You open the doors on the south side of the stadium, and boom, there's the sea right there, and a beautiful
Mhm.
beach, and there are beach courts and all that. But it's not used because it's too far out of the city, for people to really without a car. A lot of people in Japan don't need cars or don't have a car. They used to run tournaments. In fact, my very first FIVB event that I was responsible for, a part of, was at that stadium, right? And it's a gorgeous, I mean, great capacity. I mean, maybe about 4,000 capacity and full and everything, but it's not used because it's too difficult to run the event in that location. Whereas you look at, and it's as expensive as it is. I mean, a great example is just this past 3 weekends, the AVP tour, did a sort of a kind of a hybrid bubble competition. They ran their whole season over 3 weekends in a in the parking lot. Ironically, it was a parking lot in Long Beach where the 1984 Olympic, the men
Wow.
won their Olympic gold medal indoors, and the women won silver. But they built out a secured structure, no fans. No extraneous personnel. The players were tested. The staff was tested, as I understand, and I just saw a report. Triborn had just put out a little podcast and said zero infections for coronavirus. So there's
Amazing.
that. But imagine if a stadium like that, in non-pandemic times, right? Imagine if a stadium like that existed, somewhere where we could have beach volleyball, different levels. It could be pro, it could be high school, it could be club, it could be NCAA. But imagine if stadiums like that existed, in our country, right, where you could just keep it up for 8 weeks during the summer or in the spring or even in the fall and winter. In some places you can still play, and we could, that would do a lot to help promote it. But it's incredibly expensive. That then we come back to again the economic impact, right? It's
I
impossible.
think
The closest thing we come to is NCAA. Their stadiums are beautiful.
I think that in order to continue to avoid this massive amount of clubs, that instead of creating more clubs just because of creating clubs in the game that we love,
Hmm.
maybe an opportunity to put everything together between diversity and inclusion, growing the sport, and then continuing to evolve, would be maybe if you want to open a club, maybe you either have to have power volley or beach volleyball as part of your menu of indoor
Right.
volleyball.
Oh, that's a
Um,
perfect world. It's starting to happen. Organically, it is starting to happen. There are, as clubs, and typically I find this is true with clubs that have their own facilities, right?
yeah.
And depending, I mean, you're part of the United States, you're in Illinois, there's some, like Adversity Volleyball, has terrific facilities. And that
Amazing.
was my Culets club that he belonged to. So certainly there is a, kind of a little soft spot in their heart for, adaptive sport, right? Um, other parts around the country where facilities are
Limited.
available, right? Or,
Mhm.
well, yeah, where they're available, you see
Mhm.
this sort of inclusion happening. Where they're limited, not only are we not, the opportunity is not there yet, but because of this pandemic situation, we're talking about, you know, a real threat to club or private institution volleyball or in
True.
sport in general, because now you've got high schools that are going to play fall and spring seasons in the same months, and colleges are going to have to do the same. I mean, the availability of facilities already was low, right, and
Laurie,
now
and
it's going to
and I
be
think
threatened.
I think that this pandemic is also going to create a limitation of the multi-sport athletes that is so common here in the U.S.
Yeah,
because now we're moving into the spring for most high schools, and kids might choose basketball over volleyball.
right,
They will be
right,
put in a situation that they will have to choose,
right.
and that might mean a threat for this to the sport that we love as well.
I think so. 100%. It's going to be, well, you're not only talking about the athletes having to choose, but there are several coaches who coach
Mm,
multi-sport,
right,
and
right.
they juggle the seasons well because they don't overlap, or they didn't
Hmm.
overlap until
Hmm.
now. And so there are going to be a lot of referees, a lot of people involved in sport, including the parents. Like, what if you
Hmm.
have kids who play both sports? And
Hmm.
now I mean, already it's a struggle, right? You got to get one kid to practice here and one kid to practice there. And what about weekend tournaments and all that? But now compounding everything into, even a smaller time frame is really going to force some difficult choices. And volleyball, unfortunately, may be one of the things that people can't choose,
Hmm.
in order to do something else, or to fulfill a commitment elsewhere. So yeah, it's a big threat, huge threat.
Laurie, last subject I want to talk to you about
Hmm.
is you were the chair of the board of directors of maybe the best federation in the world. Um, that's pretty big time.
It was, I never aspired to be the chair of the board of directors. I still have a hard time saying those words, out loud. I was pleased to serve USA Volleyball. It was a great experience. It was a difficult experience, for me. I came in during a real difficult period in time. Uh, I um, I appreciated the opportunity to be chair. I took it very seriously, maybe more seriously than I should have. But I've always felt I've done a lot of board service and volunteer service over the years. And for every organization that I've been a volunteer for, I always try to keep that as part of my daily routine. Right, there's some time carved out for volunteerism. Like now, for example, I'm volunteering on the board of Angel City Sports, and it's a different experience with that kind of nonprofit, and that sort of dedication there. But with a national governing body, especially going through a lot of transitions that USA Volleyball was going through at the time, it can be a very difficult position. And as volunteers, which a lot of the leadership is volunteer based, and I give those people a lot of gratitude for volunteering their time. But there's an accountability issue. If you don't treat it like a real job, if you just say, "Oh, I'm just a volunteer. It doesn't matter what I say or what I do," that's to me, that's the wrong attitude, right? If you don't treat it seriously and hold yourself and other people around you accountable, and also think about, what impact your decisions and other decisions are having, and it should never just be about one person, right? It's always, I think the board was sick of me by the time I left, because I was always like, okay, here's an issue that everybody has to talk about and decide. I think they were willing, they were waiting to kick me out the door. In fact, like, I wasn't even able to finish my last board meeting. I had to run. It taught me a lot about the Olympic and Paralympic world, as well as the national governing body, National Olympic and Paralympic world, that I suspected, I knew, I didn't know. I learned a lot that I didn't know. And it also exposed me to other sports. I've had a lot of other organizations ask, "Oh, hey, would you be interested in, not being chair, but, being on our board?" And it piqued my interest in other sports, ironically. It solidified my love of volleyball, certainly, but it also makes you, I laugh sometimes because people ask me about my career, because I'm not an elite athlete, I'm not an Olympic athlete or Paralympic athlete. I'm somebody who's existed behind the scenes in the business side of sport on almost every side. I mean, just about every side. I think USA Volleyball might have been the last side of a one industry sport, that I had been exposed to. And whenever you are that deeply involved, working or volunteering or selling, sold volleyballs. I made volleyballs. I mean, even to that extent, right? I've been the ball retriever at events. I've shoveled sand, in Brazil, and so it's, and I'm not above any of that. Nobody is, and I'm really happy to have had those experiences. But what it can make you now it's been 31 years, it can make you a little bit cynical or skeptical, and because you have seen, and again, it's not exclusive to volleyball. It could be any industry there. And it's a rare opportunity to literally be able to see all sides of one industry. And it makes you skeptical. Some people call me biased. Some people, I've made a lot of enemies that I didn't have. 7 years with USA Volleyball, I made more enemies in my entire lifetime in the sport. But, it's not that you're personally biased. It's that your personal experience gives you a different lens to look through, right? So you're not as easily, enamored with things. You're not as easily manipulated by certain things. You're still manipulated, but it's, serving in that capacity was, again, not something I, foresaw or aspired to. But when the challenge was presented, and it was a challenge, I felt like, okay, this might be the last thing I can do in volleyball, because you're going to have to take a stand. And getting back to where we started this conversation, right? There are certain issues that you're going to have to take a stand on, and it's not going to make you it's not a popularity contest, right? It's not going to make you very popular with a large percentage of your constituent base. What I am grateful for are some of the people that I had the opportunity, to work with. A lot of the staff that I had known before I volunteered. I'd been around sort of the periphery of USA Volleyball for my entire career, right? But never able to be in any sort of official volunteer capacity or work for staff or do anything else, because I was always doing other things with other companies. So when this opportunity came up, and it was just right around the time of the right after the London Olympics, when I was elected to the board. Wasn't something I was looking to do. I got a couple phone calls, and hey, you should apply. I think I tell the story all the time. I think I sent my application in like at 11:59 the night before the deadline. I swear, I think I was the last person, and there were lots of people, trying to run for this position, which had been open. It was the beach volleyball at large, director position, and not that nobody wanted it, but they had tried these election processes, and again, a period of transition, a period of reform. At USAV, I've been contacted by a lot of other board chairs and presidents and CEOs of national governing bodies asking what the experience was like, and I can't say everything because there's a lot of things you can't really go into detail about. But one of the things that I tell them is, you have to go into it eyes wide open, right? Go into it not expecting anything out of it, but expecting to
Mhm.
give more to it, right? And come out of it and take a break. Come out of it and give yourself some distance, which I did. I gave myself about a year, and then this pandemic hit, and so it's going to be a little longer than a year to
Good.
uh,
That's
get
okay.
back to work on something. But yeah, I needed the break when I was done.
Laurie, the last thing is not volleyball related,
Hmm.
but I want to ask you something that that you are that also means a lot to you. You for the ones that follow Laurie on social media, you posted a picture in a really important, historic, and special place for the wrong reasons, but that means a lot to your background now as a memorial. Can you speak a little bit about it and
Right.
what should we learn about it?
Well, and we just had the anniversary, 75th anniversary of the bombing in Hiroshima, and then today in Nagasaki, Japan. Why that resonates with me so much is my ancestry is from specifically Hiroshima. My family immigrated to Hawaii, many generations before I was born, but our ancestors come from Hiroshima, and that's important to me, right? Ancestry and history, and that is really important to me. Uh, the stories, and over the years, I had obviously studied about the bombing, as a student in school and in Hawaii. Growing up, has been a lot of attention focused on Hiroshima because a lot of folks in Hawaii
Of
are
course.
descendants
Yes.
of people who are either affected by the bombing directly or whose families, eventually made their way to Hawaii. The Shojis, the say,
Mm.
Kavika Shoji and I share that in our family history, and Eric as well, and Kobe. But for me, Hiroshima has always been kind of when I was younger, I was like, oh, I would love to visit there. And then, they say everything happens for a reason. When I took the job at Mikasa Sports, so I worked for Mikasa in the United States for a
Mhm.
number of years, and when I first took the job, this was in the kind of mid to late 90s. Um, I took a trip with the president, who's a dear, dear friend, Richard McCoy, a friend to volleyball everywhere, right,
Mm.
worldwide. He was responsible for a lot of the design and the marketing and of serious, volleyball products and other sport products. But he loved volleyball. He loved water polo. He was very engaged in both of those sports. Never
Mhm.
played them, but very,
Mm.
engaged. His kids played, but he and I took a trip, my first trip to Japan to visit Mikasa's global headquarters, which is in Hiroshima. And I thought at the moment that, oh
Mhm.
my God, like what, and I didn't know that when I took the job at Mikasa. I was just learning I'd used their products for my whole life. In fact, my first volleyball, which is still in the Mikasa office,
Of
was a Mikasa, volleyball. I think it was
course.
like
Yes.
in like the fifth grade or something. The first one that I actually owned, I was like, oh, this is my ball. I have to write my name on it and protect it at all costs. Um, but we took that first trip, and when I found out that the headquarters was in Hiroshima, I remember telling my mom and my grandma, they're like, "Oh, that's where our family's from." I'm like, oh, I knew that, but I didn't really know. And when I got there, and it's a little bit of a trip, to get there. But when I got there, I immediately fell, in love with the city. It's not as fast paced, as Tokyo or Osaka or Los Angeles or Honolulu but there is a kind of a quiet reserve, about it. And getting to Mikasa, the headquarters, a lot of the ball companies were headquartered there. It's industrial rubber companies is what they all,
Mhm.
start our conglomerate or our subsidiaries of. And the Mikasa people, the president at the time, they found out and they knew that I was from, my family was from Hiroshima. My ancestors are from Hiroshima. And so, I think that was kind of a special bond, with the company, but also they were so nice to set up an opportunity. I took a half a day with one of the translators and one of the young gals who worked at Mikasa, and she showed me all around the city. And we're talking about both the things that are on the tourist guide to, to Hiroshima you read in the book, but the places, that I think they were surprised to find out, that I was, and they loved that I was from Hawaii, but they were surprised to find out that I can use chopsticks, that I'm a lover of all things Japanese food, that, that I eat the same way they eat, but I don't look the same. I kind of do, but I don't. And she took me everywhere. She took me, to see things that I never would have had the chance or the time to see, if not for that first opportunity. And so I've made it a point, as often, I think there's only been one time where, and I've been back to Japan several times over the years, to do business and for, for vacation and all. But I try to take the time every trip. I think there's only been once when I haven't been able to get to Hiroshima, at least even for the day, right? And take people that are important to me, to Hiroshima as well. When they come on these visits, we'll take a day or half a day or, spend the night and visit, the city. And I take them on the same walk that she took me on. Like we ride the cable, or we ride the little tram, we ride the train, we go out to Miyajima Island, we ride the ferry, we see the deer, we feed the deer, we come home, so it's sort of a rite of passage, if you will, especially people who've worked for me over the years in volleyball. I had the chance to take two of my assistants and interns, to Japan to have that same experience that I had. And although they were already volleyball people, they had a completely different understanding of volleyball after visiting Japan. And that's true, I think, for everybody. Japan, they volleyball is sacred to the Japanese, right? It's
the league is really good. It has always been.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And the league is good because the people support it and the people involved are good people, right? They're really doing the most they can. So for me, Hiroshima is it's a special spot. I think if I ever lived anywhere else other than the United States, I might consider moving to Japan, and Hiroshima would definitely be up on the top of, the list. But the other thing that resonates is, that the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right, is yet another, I think, sort of touch point, right, on the issues of human rights. There was just this article put out by Human Rights Watch. Minky Worden, wrote a really stunning article about abuses, in sport. And, unfortunately, that had been part of early culture, in high level Japanese or Asian, training, right, for Olympic level, elite level athletes. It's true of almost every country around the world. You can find some, form of abuse or whatnot. But when I think about those moments, I think about those issues. I think about those athletes in particular, right? I use that experience of being in Hiroshima and what the symbolism of being in the Peace Park is, has been, to think back. Okay, that's why you get involved, right? Because at some point, a situation can escalate where there's no turning back, right? And the consequences or the fallout of that situation are going to be devastating. Right? Not comparing that to the bombing, but but really there's a line that can be drawn between the two, right? If you don't do something to stop, a bad situation from escalating or happening, it's going to escalate to the point where you can't do anything about it, and you're just going to have to suffer the consequences, right? And try to figure out how to pick up the pieces.
The irony of always seeking peace through war. So, but that applies to everything that we do, and but hopefully we get better. And I think one of the biggest ways is one of your biggest projects, which has been diversity and inclusion, is because of the way that you have lived. So thank you so much for what you have done for the game, what you continue to do, and more impressively, for the most part, to see everything from the stands. We should get involved. We should be part of the conversation. We should be part of the change. So again, I'm grateful for you being a change maker in the game that we love. This has been Lori Okimura. Lori, any last words for the people watching?
I guess the last thing I would say is continue to do what you're doing for the sport that you love, right? Podcasts like Volley Junkies, like what you're doing, Manolo, is so important to keep us connected. Stay connected in the volleyball world. It's easier now than it ever has been for friends of volleyball around the world to stay, in touch, right? To give each other support, at least online or virtually. And, I guess don't forget that you solidify making an opportunity for yourself so that you can turn around and make a better opportunity for everyone else around you.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, everyone that's watching tonight. Please don't forget that you can go to our Facebook page and watch this and many other conversations. We also have a YouTube page called Junkies project that I'm build and coming out in the next day. So please stay tuned for that. This has been Concepcion, Lori Okimura, live volleyball. So thanks again for everyone. We'll see you soon.